Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the Coral Beach Case Files series and founder at Engine Book. Let's see what we have today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Write Project podcast. I know, I say they're all special. Everyone's sick of hearing me say how special the episodes are, but this one really is. We've got a special treat for listeners today. We've got the first chapter of Andrew Peacock's new novel, Viral, which just hit stores' shelves in August and has been selling like crazy. It was on CBC. It's been everywhere. For those who don't know, Viral was written 2 years ago by Dr. Andrew Peacock, who's a veterinarian from here in the province, and it's about what if a novel flu-like virus hit the world and like a pandemic, and what would the effects be on Newfoundland as an island? Would we have to shut down and close our borders and all of the headaches that come along with that, and how would we survive? I should note this book was written 2 years ago, before anyone had ever heard of COVID-19 or anything of that sort. So when I've been selling this book, I kind of wink and nudge and say, do you want to see how it ends? Because some authors are strangely prescient in their works. For those who don't know about Andrew Peacock, he was born in Toronto and raised in Northern Ontario. After finishing degrees in biology at Trent University and veterinary medicine at the University of Guelph, he moved with his wife to the small fishing village of Freshwater on the island of Newfoundland. As a veterinarian, he worked in a mixed animal practice in rural Newfoundland from 1982 to 2010, kind of like our own Dr. Pohl. He is now retired from clinical practice and works for the Newfoundland Labrador College of Veterinarians. Andrew and his wife previously owned an independent bookstore named Water Words in the town of Carbonear. His family, writing, music, photography, and love for the outdoors keep him very busy and happy. He has written 2 books previous to this, one with Penguin Random House, that was Creatures from the Rock, his humorous autobiography or semi-autobiographical tale. Also from Flanker Press, he wrote One Brave Boy and His Cat. His third book, as I said, Viral, came out with Engine Books, which is a company that I own stake in, just for clarification on that. And his fourth book will also be out with Engine Books. It is Bifocal, a collection of short stories and the reflections, in which he teamed with artist Kaylee Middlecoop, and she provided pictures for which he drew inspiration to write short stories. So check an eye out for that in 2021. So what we've got for you today is the first chapter. Andrew's been recording an audiobook of Viral, one chapter at a time. It's written by the author himself, or read by the author himself, I should say. So we have that here for you today, and we really hope you enjoy it. And then check out Viral. It's available at many different bookstores and, honestly, wherever better books are sold, as well as ebooks on Amazon, and as I said, soon audiobooks as well. All right, let us cut to it, and here we have Viral by Andrew Peacock.
Chapter 1. Welcome to the Monkey House. Where he came from, it never got as hot as this. Sweat plastered John's shirt to his torso, but he dismissed the discomfort and prepared himself for action. The young statistician in a tight white t-shirt and shorts leaned back and served. It took every bit of his concentration to watch the ball rather than the fascinating curve of her hips. The serve wasn't hard, and it was easy for him to set the ball up cleanly for the geologist next to him. She jumped and spiked the ball back over the net, but not with enough force to give the other team any trouble. Their return moved the play deep into John's end, and the thick-set man who did some mysterious work on measurement standards popped the ball up high and so far sideways that it was beyond the boundaries of the court. John made a wild dash, dove into the grass, and managed to put the ball back in play. The girl he'd just set up lobbed it over the net, high and slow enough that a muscular guy on the other team smashed it down into an empty space for the final game point. John didn't worry much about losing. This was just a healthy and friendly way to spend his lunch hour. He was far more concerned with impressing girls than scoring with the ball. He looked at his watch and, seeing it was 1:45, waved goodbye to the other players and headed off for the research building. Because he worked in a biosecure facility, he was required to shower every time he came in or out. The advantage was that he was able to comfortably engage in sweaty sports halfway through the day, but it meant that his lunch hours were shortened to allow for his time under the nozzles. John had moved from his home on the island of Newfoundland 8 years earlier and was now studying veterinary medicine at the University of Guelph. He was thrilled to have a summer job at the Tunney's Pasture Animal Research Building in Ottawa. During his time with an experienced veterinarian, he was expected to develop an understanding of, and perhaps even love for, lab animal medicine. Although John had no intention of ever permanently being involved in this kind of work, it was an enjoyable way to spend a summer. The Animal Research Building screamed of sterility. The 2 heavy metal doors to the outside had small windows lined with strands of metal. Inside, there were no posters or notices on the wall, and the floors were spotless. He took the elevator to the 2nd floor and came out to a small hallway with doors to men's and women's showers. He'd been through the procedure so many times that there was no thought involved in undressing and stepping under the cold water. These showers were refreshing, but he could feel that his skin was suffering from the constant washing. He dried off and pulled on clean underwear, socks, and OR suit that were neatly folded in his locker. John finished dressing by putting on running shoes that had never been worn outside of the building. It was just a short walk from the showers to his workspace. He didn't have his own office, but shared quarters with Olga and Beth. Olga was an older, heavy-set woman who was a senior lab technician in the building. She'd done her training in Germany and continually went on about the lax standards of Canadian biosecurity compared with what she'd experienced at the institutes at home. On his first day on the job, Olga had complained that John's hair was too long for someone who intended to work in a secure facility. Olga's own hairstyle was a serious affair that looked more suited to a young boy. As he walked in, she looked up from a folded sheet of paper that she held in her hands. "Hello, John. I'm glad that you decided to join us for the afternoon. I've been spending my lunch hour going over the libretto for a marvelous piece of opera that I will be attending this Saturday. Do you like Wagner?" She pronounced the composer's name as he would have said it himself and pushed out the first syllable harshly. "Don't know much about Wagner, Olga. The most I could tell you is that some of the stuff he wrote involves big women with Viking hats, and a lot of it can be pretty long. You Canadians have no appreciation for high culture. Wagner is perhaps the greatest composer that this world has known. It's a shame today's youth don't have the attention span to understand challenging works." John knew that his comment about Viking hats had been as far as he could tease Olga, and wisely changed the subject. "So you must be looking forward to your 2 weeks in Europe." "It will indeed be a relief. I intend to take in enough opera and lieder to spare me through another few months working here. I hope you two will keep everything clean and proper. Can I trust you to water my plants while I'm away?" For all of Olga's insistence on strict biosecurity measures, John couldn't understand how she managed to have 2 plants in pots full of regular dirty dirt in her office. Their quarters were classified as Level 3 biosecure, and he was sure that the plants and soil from the outside didn't meet those standards. Beth turned from her microscope and reassured Olga that her plants would be taken care of. There were a lot of things about Beth that John hadn't figured out. From his conversations with her, it seemed that she had nothing beyond high school education. He never heard exactly what her job description was, but she was skilled in microscopy and understood all of the blood analyzing machines they worked with. The one thing he was certain of was that Beth was a stunner. She had a winning smile, a spectacular figure, and thick blonde hair that curled down below her shoulders. Although she couldn't have been more than a year or two older than him, she treated John like a little boy. In the months he'd been working there, he'd learned nothing about Beth's interests or home life. Despite his invitation, she never came outside for their noon break, she never read or listened to music, and as far as he could tell, all she did for the hour off was to eat her delicate lunches. The afternoon promised to be interesting. Earlier that morning, Dr. Jameson had told them they would be collecting blood samples from all of the green monkeys in room 347. John had a love-hate relationship with the monkey work. He found the animals endlessly fascinating, but he had some trouble seeing that keeping these intelligent beings caged up was worth the scientific knowledge that came from the research done on them. When John had free time, he would go into the monkey rooms and just look at the animals. It amazed him how the monkeys seemed to be just as interested in him as he was in them. At the beginning of the summer, it was obvious that they recognized him as a stranger and cowered in the back of their cages when he came into their rooms. As time went on, they became bolder and would eventually come up to the bars of their enclosures to stare at him. It amused him to watch the monkeys for a while. Sometimes he'd open the door as if he was leaving and then sneak around the side of a cage where they couldn't see him. When he would step back into the center of the room, the monkeys would let out a collective "oh" that seemed to express surprise and perhaps some amusement. John always believed that this game gave the monkeys some respite from their boring existences. Because there were 3 new greens in 347 that had just come out of quarantine, Dr. Jameson wanted blood work done on all the animals in the room. The newcomers had tested negative for every disease they'd been checked for, but the vet was always cautious and worried about false negative results. 15 years earlier, one of the vets who'd worked in the facility died from a monkey bite. Although the biting animal had been seronegative for every test that had been done, an autopsy of the victim showed he had died of simian herpes B disease. John and Beth filled a cart with all the equipment they would need for blood collection and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Derek was patiently waiting for them in room 347. He was the all-round assistant in the facility. He hadn't even finished high school, but he was the best pig wrangler, chicken holder, and monkey catcher that John had ever come across. The monkeys realized that something was up when 3 people came into the room. The fact that one of them was carrying a clipboard was an indication that they would be caught and taken out of their homes. The cages were a poor replacement for the trees back home in Senegal, but they did offer a degree of security. Every time the humans pulled them from their cages, something unpleasant happened. Everyone had their roles in the processing of monkeys. Derek would catch, John would draw blood samples, and Beth would keep records. Jameson was at another of his endless string of meetings on biosecurity standards. Derek swatted John across the shoulder with his heavy leather welding gloves. "Why don't you try grabbing a couple of these fellows? You've watched me do this enough times that you shouldn't have any trouble." Since he started his summer job, John had hoped he would someday get the chance to actually handle a monkey. Derek's suggestion excited him and scared him at the same time. He wondered if he really had the nerve to reach into the cages. It seemed that he watched himself from above as he put on the gloves and moved to the nearest cage bank. The first monkey was a small female. She was well under a half-meter in height and likely weighed less than 4 kilograms. As he stood in front of the cage, the female let out a high-pitched squeak and moved up to the bars to stare. She was a beautiful animal with a long gray face ringed with golden fur. John had come to appreciate the different facial expressions that the monkeys were capable of. This one had a puzzled look that suggested she was wondering what John was planning to do and why he seemed so nervous. Derek said, "Let's get on with it," and undid the complex closure mechanism on the front of the cage. He positioned himself directly in front of the opening as he pulled the door back. "You gotta stand right here or the little buggers will jump right out past you." As soon as the door started moving, the little monkey turned and squeezed into the back left corner of the cage. This timid animal had no intention of making a break for the freedom of the rest of the room. Derek moved to allow access to the opening, and John reached inside. The monkey didn't move as he gently wrapped his gloved fingers around her upper forearms. He pulled her out into the room and felt pressure around his own biceps. Looking down, he could see that the monkey had reached up with his feet and now it was a question of who was holding whom. "Nice work. You're a natural monkey catcher. Now, you have to hand her over to me because there's no way I'm taking samples from this animal. I don't mind being around monkeys, but the sight of blood makes me faint." "But Derek, I've got the only set of gloves we have. Maybe I should just put her back in the cage." "Nah, you've done all the hard work. I can hold on to her without gloves while you get the samples you need. Now just move your hands down towards her wrist just a little." No one in the room was really sure whose fault it was, but somehow in the transfer from John to Derek, the little female green monkey got free. The stainless steel cage banks didn't quite reach the ceiling, and with a quick leap, the animal was cowering on top of her enclosure. The rest of the monkeys in the room went wild with excitement. The hooting and screaming was deafening. The noise panicked the escaped animal, and she started moving along the tops of the cages. The banks lined all of the walls of the room, with gaps where the two doors were situated. The space above the cages was enough for the monkey to build up some speed, and she started a clockwise course around the room. At the gap by each door, she would leap from the cage and grab onto the door closer to swing over to the top of the next bank of cages. John and Beth cowered back to back in the center of the room. They both knew how fast these animals were and how potentially deadly they could be if they ever bit someone. Derek put his hands on his hips and slowly spun around, following the monkey's orbit. "Shit. The boss is going to be upset when he finds out about this. Maybe it would be best if he doesn't hear anything. What do you think?" Beth and John were so tight against each other's backs that it seemed they might end up permanently joined. It never occurred to John that there was any pleasantness to being so close together. Both of them silently nodded. "Well, I guess I'm going to have to fix this." John and Beth were horrified to see Derek leave the room just as the monkey was at the farthest point from his door. Their first reaction was that he'd abandoned them to the dangers of the hurtling primate. They remained frozen in place for what seemed like an hour before Derek came back in carrying a broom. "All right, you little bugger, let's see what you think of this." Derek placed the broom over his shoulder and, standing in front of the door, faced the direction of the monkey's travel. When the animal leapt into the door space, Derek swung for the bleachers. His timing was a little off, and he only brushed the golden end of the monkey's tail. The second time around, Derek's technique had improved greatly. His timing and placement resulted in the broom catching the monkey square in the middle of her abdomen just as she reached out for the door closer. The animal tumbled backwards and slammed heavily into the side of the cage she'd just jumped from. There was a loud, hollow crack from her head hitting solid metal. The other monkeys in the room let out a collective cry of horror and went silent. "Oh shit, I think I've killed her. This is going to be big trouble. How about if we just stick her back in the cage and say we found her like this when we came into the room?" John knew that there would be a careful post-mortem done on any animal that died in the facility, and that head trauma would be obvious to any trained observer. He didn't answer but remained riveted in his spot in the center of the room. Beth moved over beside Derek, and the two of them knelt down over the prostrate animal. "The poor little girl, she was just scared. You shouldn't have hit her so hard with the broom." As she spoke, the monkey let out a little moan and circled its head like someone in a martial arts movie getting ready for a big fight. Beth and Derek moved in closer. It was obvious to John that the monkey was recovering, and he was just about to warn his colleagues to get away when the animal's eyes sprang open. The humans in the room all panicked. John froze, and Beth and Derek opened their mouths and gasped. At the same moment, the monkey sneezed. Derek regained enough composure to turn his captive over and take hold of her arms. The monkey was dazed, but apparently not seriously hurt. John threaded a double-edged needle into a blood collection sleeve and picked a purple and red-topped tube from the cart. He'd had enough excitement with this monkey and wanted her finished with and back in her cage. The rest of the captures and blood collections went without incident. Even with the excitement of the escape, John didn't miss one vein. As John and Beth packed the last tubes into cardboard containers on the cart and checked the numbers on the samples against the form in the clipboard, Derek stood behind them. "So, do you think there's any need to tell anyone about our little adventure this afternoon? I don't think any of us will look too good if this gets out." John looked in on the little female and decided she was back to normal. She hissed when he came close to the cage, but he reasoned that this was an appropriate response to humans who had just assaulted her with a broom. John and Beth agreed that there was no harm done and it was better for everyone involved if nothing was said. Back in the office, John and Beth spun down the samples in the red tubes to separate out serum for virology and ran the blood from the purple tubes through the blood analyzing machine. The only unusual finding in any of the results was that the 3 new monkeys had high lymphocyte counts. Once they'd finished all of their blood work, it was time for another shower and a weekend off. Monday morning, the sun was shining when John came in for work. He went through the showers thinking that the weekend hadn't been long enough. As the summer wore on, he found that one of his joys on holidays was the escape from the constant washing. It was always possible to get too much of a good thing. Although John was 5 minutes early for work, Olga was there before him. He'd never been the first one in, and he wondered what time she actually arrived in the mornings. Despite her promptness at arrival, Olga never did any work until the clock indicated it was exactly 8:30. She was a dutiful worker, but she would never give her employer a second of time that they didn't pay her for. She waved her libretto at John. "Wagner tonight, and then off to the old country on Wednesday." The one thing John appreciated about his job was that there was no such thing as a routine day in the office. Every morning, Dr. Jameson would outline his activities, and if the vet wasn't in, there'd be a project already lined up for him. His work varied from interesting things like catching the monkeys to a dull day helping Derek clean up after the miniature pigs. Beth came in at 8:45, apologizing for her tardiness. She'd been sick all weekend and only decided at the last minute that she was well enough for work. The dull cast to her skin and the darkness under her eyes suggested that she hadn't slept well. John was concerned right away about Beth's deep, rattling cough. She hacked continuously from far down inside her lungs. Just before 9 o'clock, Dr. Jameson came in from his office down the hall and asked if Beth would help him sort some files for a preparation he was preparing. John's task for the day was to help Derek with some repairs on the 4th floor. This part of the building was 1 level higher biosecurity than the rest, and as a result, there would be at least another 2 showers that day. When anyone went to the 4th floor, they had to completely change clothing and shower in and out. Because of the high security level, outside workers weren't brought in for minor structural repairs. John took the elevator up 2 floors and met Derek in the showers. It was obvious right away that Derek had the same cold that Beth was suffering from. John tried to keep a healthy distance away, but as they worked together on the sticking door, it was necessary to be in close proximity. The repairs took the full morning, and John sighed as he realized he would need 2 complete showers to get outside for lunch. He decided he would forgo the pleasures of the outdoors for one day and read up on the research project that was a requirement of his summer employment. John showered out of the 4th floor and took the elevator down to the library. He picked out 2 articles on the 1989 Reston virus outbreak in crab-eating macaques in Virginia. This particular strain of Ebola virus had proven non-pathogenic in humans, but showed how easy it was for dangerous viruses to make their way to North America. John's project was to review the history of Ebola and discuss possible means of transmission of the virus. Everything he read suggested that Ebola was only passed through direct contact of infected individuals, but John wondered if it was possible for the disease to disperse through the air in aerosol droplets. Some of the cases he read about seemed to spread too quickly to be explained by direct contact. John always brought his lunch into the office in case rain kept him from getting outside. Today he would eat at his desk with references propped up in front of him. In the office, Olga was starting into a delicious-looking thick sandwich that was made from bread that didn't come from an ordinary grocery store. As he sat down, Olga told him that she'd sent Beth home after she came back from the vet's office. "The silly girl was coughing all over me. I can't be sick before I return to Germany." John loved the way that Olga pronounced Germany, and the emphasis she always put on the word. After lunch, Dr. Jameson was free, and John and Derek spent the rest of the day helping him attend to the green monkey's teeth. The process involved the injection of a mild sedative into each animal and a thorough dental exam, and then cleaning with ultrasound equipment. Because of the water droplets that were splashed up by the machine, all 3 of them wore surgical face masks and safety glasses during the procedure. The next day, neither Beth nor Derek came in, and both Olga and Dr. Jameson had mild coughs. John asked if anyone knew how their missing co-workers were doing, but they hadn't been in contact with anyone at work. Olga complained all morning about her cough and said she was going home soon to look after herself so she wouldn't miss her flight to Germany. Jameson was in a foul mood and at noon told Olga she should go home. Wednesday morning, Dr. Jameson was obviously sicker, and Beth and Derek were still missing. When the vet told John to spend the day working on his research paper, he was disappointed that he wouldn't get to go home early. On Thursday, John showed up to an empty office. He was clean and ready to go, but had no direction for his day's work. He started with a quick tour of all the animal rooms. If no one else was working, he wanted to make sure that all of the animals had been properly fed by the night staff. Every animal he looked at was in good condition, and there was ample water and food in every room. The only concern he had was that a number of the green monkeys in room 347 were coughing. None of them looked sick, but when he stopped and listened, there were quiet snicks all around the room. John whistled and listened to the lonely echo as he walked in from the monkey room back to his office. When he opened the door, he was startled to find 3 figures in complete hazmat suits. The apparent leader walked up to John and ordered him to sit at his desk. Through his face mask, John could make out that he was middle-aged and had a white mustache. It wasn't obvious even what sex the other 2 were. While the man asked John if he'd experienced any coughing or headaches, a second figure opened a plastic case filled with blood tubes and reached out for John's arm. He was too stunned to complain about the blood samples taken or the collection of throat swabs that followed. When John finally regained enough composure to ask what was going on, the leader told him that he'd received reports of a possible disease situation and that anyone working in the building might be at risk of infection. The man was unwilling to give more information until John insisted that he might be able to provide some useful background if he had some idea what was going on. The man reluctantly admitted that Derek had died the previous night and they had not been able to contact Beth or Olga. He finished with a strict insistence that none of this was to be told to anyone. John understood the importance of a clear history, and he carefully outlined the incident with the green monkey in room 347. It was fast becoming apparent to him that the little female sneeze could be an important part of the story. He also told them that blood samples had been collected the same day and that there were serum in the fridge from the 3 new monkeys. John was ordered to give his contact information and to leave the building immediately. If he had any sign of coughing or sickness, he was to contact the number on the card that the man with the white mustache provided. Until he heard otherwise, he was to stay in the city and minimize his contact with other people.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.